Hello there, sword friends. Today I have a talky head video for you where I'm going to talk about my review process to provide some transparency. Now, there's a bunch of stuff going on about reviews, and it's a good time to do it outside of the sword realm of things. There's been some chat about what's ethical in reviews, and I figure this is probably a good time to do it. But it's also spurred by some comments that I've gotten around how much does it cost to have you review something, or how much did they pay you to say that, or calling me a sellout. Now, some of these are gentle ribs and aren't really meant sincerely, and others are not, but either way, it's a suggestion that further transparency is probably appropriate. So I've made most of these comments in a number of other videos, but I haven't consolidated them into one video, at least not meaningfully, and I imagine a number of new viewers here don't want to peruse through hundreds of videos to hear the little snippets of where all this stuff might be. So I'm going to try and do that here in this video. And if you're not interested in that, I can understand, especially if you're a long-time viewer here. You've probably heard everything I'm going to say in this video throughout the course of watching a number of the other videos. However, I'll make an effort to put it in one place here. So for those of you that have already heard it, just thank you for watching. Thank you for engaging, even if it's to tell me that my hairline is receding or that I'm doing it wrong. I've gained a lot of knowledge through the process of doing it. I appreciate everyone's viewership. The reason I get to do these reviews and the reason I get these samples and the reason that this kind of transparency is required is because people watch, people engage with the content. So thank you very much for doing that. This video is going to follow an introduction. I haven't actually, I think, ever done an introduction, but I'll talk about me a little bit, and I'll talk about my martial background and some stuff that I think is maybe where I'm at as a person, as a reviewer, and hopefully that provides you with some context so that you know how seriously to take me. I'll talk about the goal that I have with the channel, what I'm actually trying to accomplish, so that hopefully that is useful in informing your decision. And then I'll talk about my process for reviewing in terms of the financials, how the communication works, etc. And then I'll answer some questions that I often get that I think are related to this subject and kind of maybe further expound on some important facts about sword reviews or the business behind it or the ethics, etc. So anyway, that's the plan. It's going to be a long talky head video of just me and this forehead blabbing at you. If that's not interesting, I can't blame you, but here we go. So as promised, first, after a decade of doing YouTube, I will introduce myself. Hi, my name is Matt Jensen. You can call me Matthew Jensen, Matt Jensen, hey you, sword friend Matt, whatever floats your boat. This is the Matthew Jensen channel because I'm great at naming. I am a father, a husband, and I do a day job, which I believe is important to know because I don't rely on YouTube to support YouTube. So other creators out there really need your support, and I'd encourage you to support them if you are able. I don't require that. This is a hobby, a labor of love, and I have a day job which supports me. If you're curious, I work in supply chain, and my brain is wired to do min-maxy things where I find complex solutions to complex problems and hopefully cost effectively. So anyway, that's how my brain works. I do that professionally. I do buzzwords that you would hear in corporate in terms of vendor management and demand planning and forecasting and yada, yada, yada strategy, etc. And so that's what I do. I work with international partners to bring goods and stuff around the globe, but supply chainy type stuff. So in terms of like how things move through a system, I have some passing familiarity with that, you might say, from a professional standpoint. Anyway, professionally, that's the thing you, I suppose, need to know. I don't talk much about my job because it's not really particularly fun to hear about, but I do have one, and I have a father. I have a father, of course, but I have children. I'm a father. I spend time with my kiddos, and I have a wife who is gracious enough to donate time in this hobby. I'm a happily married person, a happy father with healthy children. I'm very blessed to have a stable family and also a hobby that enriches my life, and the two seem to commingle reasonably well. So anyway, martial experience, because I think that's relevant. Swords are martial objects, and so my experience in moving them around is probably applicable. So I've studied martial arts since I was very young. Early childhood is when I started. I never stopped. I keep doing it. Anyway, in terms of sword-related stuff, because I have collected a number of martial arts in my life, I haven't stuck with one. I've jumped around a little bit, but early in my childhood, I studied fencing, and so there was a sword club around. I studied foil fencing primarily, but also dabbled in épée and saber a little bit. I did that for a few years and then stopped. As an adult, I moved into eskrima, and that teaches a little bit of knife and a little bit of what would be considered short sword, and then also some long sword, though it doesn't get used in the sense that you might think of a long sword, but it's the longer weapon called the compulon. It's where my interest began in that. There were also spear and glaive type things that involved the Filipino martial art, but I didn't get to do them mostly because of the ceiling situation in the place that I studied. Anyway, later, I studied Kenjutsu, and so I study currently 2 styles of Kenjutsu. I study Tenshin Shoden Katori Shinto Ryu. I often call it Katori, and it's important to know that I've done that for about 10 years because it's very old and it's a traditional Koryu and yada, 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 but I'm not allowed to show it on camera. So I can tell you I study Katori, and then I can not show you anything about Katori. And sometimes the movements might bleed into how you see me maneuver around, but fundamentally I'm not really allowed to explain or show much about that art, apart from saying that I do it and have done it about 10 years. I hold no rank. There are only 2 ranks, or 3 maybe, insofar as I'm aware, in Katori. They don't have a traditional belt system, so I'm just a student, and I've done it for a hot minute. The other martial art that I study in terms of Kenjutsu is Toyama Ryu, and they are a little more lenient about showing stuff on camera. So it's not that I'm teaching the art on camera, but in terms of doing kata, in terms of showing you how swords move around, in terms of talking about it, I can do that on camera, and so that is the art I do on camera. I hold the rank of Shodan in that art, which is very, very recent. It's in the last month or so that I passed the test. I've done it for 6 or 7 years, probably somewhere in there. I'm not exactly sure how long, but much longer than you would expect to be a Shodan. Now, worth knowing in Toyama Ryu, there's no Dan and then Shodan, and so your first rank is the first degree black belt, so to speak. And so that's the first rank in the art, and that means I'm, just on the journey. So why is that important? Well, because I do study swordsmanship, but I don't hold any rank that would make me an authority figure in the subject, and that's why you should know it. I'm interested, I'm trying, I'm still furthering my knowledge, but not any kind of ninja master. That means you should take what I have to say too seriously when it comes to how to move them around or how they move around. The other bit in terms of experience that you should know about me is as a collector. So I've always liked swords. It's one of the earliest things I can remember. My first toys were like plastic swords and cars, and I certainly leaned into one more than the other. So I've spent a lot of time collecting, and that's a thing worth knowing. Now, it's worth quantifying a little bit at this point. If you compound all, or kind of gather in all of the samples and consignment items and things people have lent me and my own collection, I've handled and spent a fair amount of time with thousands of swords. And so that firsthand experience is probably worth something. Lots of people have more experience, but that's the experience I've had. Now, I haven't owned all of them, but I'm not calling like, hey, I held it at a show or I saw it in a store as time spent. But I've handled thousands of swords within my collection, within my, I've gotten to spend days with them, I guess would be what I'd say. Now, I haven't gotten to cut with all of them or break all of them, obviously, but I have been able to do that actually with quite a number of them. So I have some firsthand experience, which hopefully is helpful. So what does all that mean? Well, if you consider time spent or tuition paid as expertise, then I'm an expert. But if you don't, which I don't personally, then I'm not. And that's, I suppose, what it means. Doing a thing for a long time doesn't make you good at it or an authority figure. Handling a lot of stuff doesn't mean you understand them or are smart. And there are people who are experts in my mind. There are scholars who have pushed the limits of human understanding on the subject of how swords move, how they are important historically, the nuances between them. There are collectors that have owned or handled or cared for masterpieces that are like the best things ever made by humans and understand the nuances about their construction and what makes them good and separate and what fundamentally separates them from some of the other stuff out there, I guess. And a lot of times if I've gotten a chance to hold something really precious, which I've been fortunate enough to do that, it often goes over my head. Some people just grasp that quite a bit better than I do. And further, there are scholars, I already talked about scholars, but there are martial arts practitioners as well who like dedicate their lives to the craft of martial arts and becoming as perfect at it as they can, and I'm not. So the nuances of moving a sword and how it plays into the martial art and how you engage in fencing is often lost on me. I'm trying to understand, but I still have a long way to go. So hopefully one day I get to count myself among these experts, but that day is not today, and that's what I think you should probably take away from my expertise. But hopefully you know a little bit more about where I'm at, so you know how seriously to take my reviews. The bit of the review that I should talk about next is what is my goal for this channel, and it's a pretty simple goal. I'm trying to help sword friends better spend their money with information, and I invite you to call me out if I'm not doing that. So I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I'm not trying to start drama. I'm not trying to make sword companies go bankrupt. That's another thing that's worth calling out specifically as not the goal. So if you hear me say things like I'd like to see this improved, it's because I wish companies made awesome things that gave every sword friend out there a bunch of variety to choose from with awesome options everywhere. And that would be ideal. That's what I would like to see happen. So I don't tell sword companies to crawl into a hole and die, because that's not what I want to see happen. But I'm just putting stuff out there, hopefully with enough information to help you decide if it's worth your money or not. I'm not trying to tell you to buy it or not, or if it's worth it or not. And hopefully you get to see me move it around. You get to hear my thoughts. And if you're a novice, then my experience and my expertise, such as it is helpful. And if you're more experienced than me, hopefully the close-ups give you some idea of if a thing is worth it or not. If you're a really experienced practitioner, even if I'm not, you can probably judge how it feels by seeing me move it around, especially if you've gotten a feel for how I move things around. Anyway, that's the goal. Now, there are side quests, so to speak, so I get to handle cool swords that I wouldn't otherwise. I get to do things with them that enhance my knowledge that I would maybe be too nervous to do otherwise. So there are other things that I get to do, but primarily this channel is focused on swords. And like I said, if I'm not doing that or could do it better, I invite your comments and critiques. Throw them down there, and if they're feasible for me to do, I will do them. I've absolutely garnered a lot from the comment section in YouTube. There have been some very helpful suggestions that have helped me make the channel what it is today. And so if it's more helpful than it was when I started, a lot of that has come from feedback from fellow sword friends. Anyway, that's the goal. Hopefully that helps you know what I'm trying to do and maybe why I don't divert. Now, I have done sword adjacent things, but fundamentally just about everything here is sword related. So anyway, that's the gist of the goals. Now I'm going to move on to the more meat and potatoes of what some folks might be interested in. So if you are a sword friend and you say, I would like to send you a sword, what do I do? If you are a vendor and want to send me a sword, what can you expect? These are the general rules that I have. And I say general because they're all somewhat negotiable. There are things that are and things that are not, but I'm a very small channel. So if you are offering me the opportunity to not spend money on a sword and also have one to talk about, then that is an opportunity that I would be kind of silly to pass up given my size. Now, I'm not small in the niche of sword collecting, but on the grand scale of YouTube, not a big channel. So I'll divide this out into like money, the goings-ons there, what's expected. I'll talk about the direction I expect vendors to choose, as well as sword friends. Then I'll talk about the samples that I get themselves from vendors. I'll talk about the time it takes me to do things and kind of the expectation for content. And then I'll talk about communication, such as it is between me and a vendor, and how it relates to not wanting them to shrivel up and die. So money, the main important one. I don't take any money, at least if you define money as something other than getting a review sample or a cutting target. Those are the two things I get from vendors. That's it. I don't ask for a check to make the review. I don't ask for compensation, commission, affiliate links, anything like that. And if you see a coupon code, if you see a link on my channel, that's primarily so the vendor can probably judge if the content is drawing eyeballs to their website. But I don't get any kickback from it. I don't want it. And that's basically the stance on money. There's no reason that money should exchange hands between a vendor and I, apart from some maybe odd exceptions, like I wanted you to cut to Tommy, but I didn't know what to buy, I'll reimburse you, or I want the sword back and I can't get you a label, so I'll reimburse you for shipping, that kind of thing. So that's about it. Otherwise, I've never taken money for a sword review. I don't intend to. I would take sponsorships that are not sword related, maybe, if they felt right. I've been offered some, but they haven't really been the right fit. So anyway, that's the gist on money, at least my stance on it. Now, I want to really outline here that this is my process. I don't expect anyone to do it the same way. If you do collect money or you watch another person who does, that does not make them unethical or bad or biased in some way that means you shouldn't listen to them. That's just my way. And that's because my brain is very min-maxy. If I were to collect money for a thing I said that was good, that might influence my ability to be objective, and I just don't want to. And also, I don't need to. I have a day job. If I collected money from it, this would kind of pollute the joy I take from doing this stuff. So that's just a me thing. I want to really specify that, especially on the money topic, because it's an important one. But that's my stance on it. Now, I talked about a direction, and I'll talk about samples after this, but I want to preface that when a vendor or a sword friend pings me, I ask for, what do you want? So if you're a private sword citizen, a sword friend that wants to send me something, and you say, hey, what what can I do? I want you to use this sword. Well, how much is, I suppose, the question that I will ask a private sword citizen. The assumption is that you will probably want your sword back and that it is not a gift. However, I do need to know what you want to do with it. Do you want me to cut with it or not? Because if I do, there's the chance it's going to break, or the chance that it's going to be diminished or damaged in some way. And that chance goes up depending on how comfortable you are with me doing various things with the sword. Tatami mats leave marks, branches can bend stuff, or things can just break sometimes unexpectedly. So I need to know that, and I will work out with a sword friend who is willing to lend me their property, how comfortable they are with me doing stuff. I think in some cases there are absolutely benefits to just doing visual tours, particularly of, works of art that maybe a person buying them isn't necessarily going to use, but are just beautiful and wonderful to share. Alternatively, if sword friends are comfortable with me cutting with their property, then to what degree, and we work that out. So that's a direction that needs to kind of be picked before I accept, doing anything. We have to work out what I think adds to the conversation, because that is part of the goal, and also what you're comfortable with. Now, as a vendor, what do I do here? There's kind of the same thing. If you don't want me to cut with it, I will often debate how useful that is, but it absolutely can be useful to share something instead of nothing. That's maybe a mantra for the channel that I should take on. But also, do you want private feedback or public feedback? And this is really important for a vendor, because every now and again I get solicited for private feedback, which I'm happy to give. If you send me a sword, I will critique it and send you feedback about said sword. And if you want that to be private, totally fine. But the expectation is that then I send private feedback and I don't make public videos about said sword. And the idea would be that it's a prototype. You're working toward improvement. I'm happy to do that. But there's not a situation where it goes real well and then turns into a public video. Likewise, I'm assuming that most vendors want me to make a public video about their product, because that's why they would send it. That's why they would risk sending something and risking bad feedback, and is the advertising that inevitably comes from putting it in front of a bunch of eyeballs that are really interested in swords. So the assumption is you want public feedback, and if you do and it goes poorly, it doesn't get to turn into private feedback. That sword will be featured. However, I do, in the spirit of not wanting vendors to go bankrupt or not wanting to cast them in a particularly bad light, if a sword review goes bad and there are issues with it, I'll reach out to the vendor, I'll talk to them. I'll talk more about how I do that, but fundamentally I would take a second sword and review that, and the first and the second would end up in the video. Sometimes it shows, hey, not really a problem with the sword, or maybe there is, but at least it's not consistent. Maybe I just got a bad one. And a customer would do that, which is why I think it's fair. If you got a sword that didn't meet your expectations in some way, and felt that it was worth returning, or that you wouldn't want to have bought it, you'd reach out to the vendor and say, here's my problem, and they have a chance to correct it. And that's what I offer. And then I include both in the video. And sometimes it shows that, hey, it was a dud and there are better ones out there. And sometimes it says there are systemic problems with that product that need to be addressed. So anyway, that is part of the choice that has to happen. One, if you send it for public review, then it ends up in the public eye. And that goes to then samples. What do I ask for in samples? So vendors will reach out to me and say, can you review a product? What would you like to review? Sometimes I reach out to vendors and say, I would like to review one of your products. Would you be willing to send one? From there, my general request is to have from between 3 and 5 swords. This is a very negotiable point. The previous 2 really are not. I need to know, I'm not taking any money from it, and usually I get no complaints about that. The other is I need a direction, and I have gotten complaints about that, but them's the breaks. But samples, if it's 1, if it's 10, like, this is a negotiable point, but my preference is between 3 and 5 for most vendors. So this is going to depend. If you're sending really high-end stuff, probably not going to want to send 5 of them, right? May not want to send more, may not even want to send 1. But 3 is, I think, the sweet spot, especially for vendors that I have no content about, because if you're doing if you offer low-end and high-end stuff, I can do a good, better, best video. I can show the low end of the spectrum, the high end of the spectrum, and kind of measures of consistency and where marks are consistently hit and where they're not. So I find that to be kind of the sweet spot, and then the extra 2 maybe for unique products or variants of the other products that are sold. So if there's different fittings that are higher end, or a different steel type or something, I think that the extra bits in there are greater. Maybe there's a cool cane sword or pole arm or nifty thing that vendor makes that nobody else does, which would be neat to show. So anyway, that's my preference. It's a negotiable point. Anything more than 5 starts to feel really overwhelming. But at the same time, if a vendor sells, relatively inexpensive swords and only sends me 1 of them, I don't have a great idea for consistency or any of that. So additional stuff is actually, I find, really helpful. again, more specifically for vendors that I've never worked with before. If I've got a number of things out about the vendor or the products that they make, then I think that becomes quite a bit less important. But especially for new ones, that's what my preference would be. So then what do I do with the samples? Well, it depends. So sometimes, obviously, I break them. That's a shtick I'm known for on YouTube. If I break them, there's not really any value. There has been some value. I've sold some broken parts of swords before, and I've used it to buy tatami mats. I'll talk about the what I make on YouTube in a second, but I have used them to I've sold some parts to get get materials to cut. Other times they're not broken, in which case I've given them away. Please don't ask me for a free sword. I get asked a few times a day now for a free sword. No would be the answer. If you ask me, the answer is inevitably no. However, I do send them out sometimes to collaborate with other reviewers. Sometimes there's a reason. I've donated some to Dojo. Anyway, that's the thing that I do with them. But primarily, I use them as additional examples. So now I have a smattering of things, and it allows me to do comparisons between the two, and it's really handy to have. So if somebody's asking about the difference between a messer and a wakizashi, I can make that video. If they want to know the difference between some polishes, like I have some examples around to do that. And very recently it was handy in comparing a mini katana and a shadow dancer sword that appeared very much the same, and I had the two because I hadn't broken them and could make a follow-up video explaining some of the differences between them. And people either saw the difference or didn't, but I could at least show them side by side, which I wouldn't be able to do if I broke everything. So anyway, that's some of the stuff that I do with the swords. What I don't do is sell the remaining examples. It makes me feel weird. I don't want to do it. I might trade some of them for other things I could do on YouTube, but I don't sell them because it makes me feel weird. So that's if I have a review sample and it's in good shape, I'm not interested in selling it because it gives me the heebie-jeebie weird feels. If somebody else does that, again, not saying it's a bad thing, just for me, it feels the weird. Anyway, that's the stuff I do with them. Now, I did mention I've sold some broken ones, and that technically counts as money. And so where's the justification? Why does that feel less weird than a full sword? Well, I guess because it's very little money. A broken sword doesn't matter very much, and I've traded them for sword services, which have then featured on the channel, and it's kept the budget within reason, because on a YouTube video, I seldom make more than the cost of a tatami mat over the lifespan of a video. And that may surprise a number of you, so in terms of money, I probably should have put it there. How much do I make on YouTube? I don't think YouTube allows me to disclose the exact amount or just show you the chart. However, I can tell you that the average lifespan of a video, I see less than what a tatami mat costs me to get. So not a huge amount of money. Sometimes there's super thanks, or sometimes there's memberships for the member folks that join. There are some other things out there that I get, but it's YouTube that pays me that, and that's often what I get. So there's more invested in camera equipment by probably at least 10 times than I've gotten from YouTube as well. So there's an equipment cost and all of that kind of stuff. I'm not complaining, but I'm just trying to paint the behind the scenes picture. So if I sell like fodder, broken bits to somebody, and I make $30 from it and use that to buy tatami mats, that'll make me, at one time they were going for like $20 a piece. So that's I don't feel like that really makes me biased or makes me feel weird, because it goes back into the channel and allows me to produce more content that I think is useful. Arguably, I could do that with other things, but I don't know. It somehow doesn't feel weird with broken stuff, and it does with new full swords. Now, the other thing I will take from vendors is targets. I mentioned this before, so what I ask for from vendors is if they want me to cut something specific and they want it featured in the video, I ask them to send it. And that's because I've been asked to cut TVs and laptops and ballistic dummies that cost $300 a piece, or zombie heads that cost about as much, or carcasses that cost a few $100s, or tatami mats, which, like I said, at one point cost $20 a piece. So if those targets can be provided and the vendor wants me to guarantee to feature them in the video, then I ask that they be provided. Sometimes that happens, not all the time. Now, if the vendor does not care what I cut, then I will provide targets. It may include those things, probably not ballistic dummies or carcasses, but sometimes I'll provide tatami. Sometimes I'll cut bottles, noodles, rolled newspaper, a bunch of other stuff. But that's just, if the vendor doesn't care, then I can't guarantee that the thing they want to see the sword used on will be included in the video. That's the other thing that I get. Again, I don't find that to be, I find it worthwhile because the tatami does have a value if it's provided, but it's going in the video and holds no value and goes in the garbage can when it's done. So anyway, worth noting about the process though is I ask those to be provided. Again, only if the vendor wants me to guarantee that they are featured in the video. If they don't, then I don't mind providing targets. The next thing I'll talk about is time. How long does it take me to make a video? Well, it used to be a month, then it turned into 3 months, and now I'm running closer to 6 months. But the time is like I said, I have a day job and I have some other priorities with family, so it can take me a while to get through things, especially if 5 examples are sent and I want to make a separate video about each one. Sometimes I'm making that 5th one ends up being a year out or so. So they can take a very long time to do, but that's because I like to spend time doing them. I don't like to be rushed. I want to do this hobby with joy, and sometimes I'm just not in the mood to. So time is definitely a sensitive thing, but also very negotiable. So if somebody reaches out and says, I'd like you to review it, but I want you to do it in a week, I maybe can do it, but I have to be really cautious about the amount of things like that I commit to, because I could very easily become overwhelmed, and that takes a lot of the fun out of the hobby. So I just need to know what the commitments are up front. Usually I quote about 3 months, but at the moment I'm running a little bit behind schedule there. I'm trying though. I'm trying. It's just the weather often does not cooperate when I actually have time to do it. So the other thing that's worth noting is what kind of content am I producing with it. So if somebody sends something that's just like a visual tour of a sword and some quick thoughts on it, those go actually pretty quick. They're not terribly hard to film. They're not super hard to edit. They still take a fair amount of time, but not as long as like a destruction test and review. Those require cooperation with weather and my physical health to do so, and all sorts of other stuff that can be quite a bit more of a commitment. So depending on the type of time the video takes to make can also have an impact on how quickly I can produce the content. And so what content is then do I make with said video? Well, pretty much guaranteed to have one long form video on YouTube. If you send 5 swords, they may all appear in one video, or they very likely, in fact, will get 5 separate videos. But I guarantee that I will make at least one video with said content, perhaps more, especially if I get to keep the sword. And there we go. Which is, again, I'm trailing thoughts here, something I should have mentioned about samples. Sometimes vendors want them back. I would rather they didn't take them back. I would, of course, like to keep them because I like swords and they're pretty to hang on the wall, and I like to use them as other examples, and sometimes I just get to pick them up and handle them and they make me smile. The Magnificent Chujen is one such example where the vendor sent it to me, didn't want it back, and whenever I pick that sword up, it just makes me smile. So I enjoy the samples, and I also get to use them in other videos, and that is a benefit to me, but I will also send the sample back to the vendor if they provide a shipping label. Back to the subject at hand though, I will guarantee that I make one video with it. If you want more, then we just need to talk about it ahead of time. That video will be on YouTube in a long form content video. If you want shorts, if you want TikTok, if you want one of the other social media platforms, I often post on those, but I'm not as well known there, and I certainly can. It just is something that we need to talk about before I take it, because the assumption is you probably want one long form video on YouTube, and that's at least what I can guarantee from sending me a review sample. The next bit to talk about is communication. How do I communicate with the vendors? I talked about how I get samples a little bit already, but what can the vendor expect from me in terms of communication once I get that sample? Well, I'll tell them I got it. I'll tell them if there's any shipping damage or anything like that. General thoughts on the sword sometimes are solicited, happy to provide it. I'm also willing to provide the vendor a video early or publish it privately to them if they want to see it ahead of time before it goes public. It's a little bit of a pain, but I don't mind doing it if the vendor requests it. Likewise, if the vendor has feedback that they want to see something changed, this is a fine line, but I am willing to change it if I have said something objectively false, where I said it was 10 inches and it is in fact 20, right? Those are corrections sometimes I can make, or I'm willing to, again, if it's just an objective, factual, false thing. However, if it's like, this didn't show well, I said this because it was my opinion about that thing and it sounded unkind, no, those are not things that I'm willing to change. I have to have complete editorial control to express my opinion, or the whole review process seems like it's not really worth much. So anyway, those are things that I am willing to do. In terms of vendor feedback, I will also tell them early if something goes catastrophically wrong. So most of the time people just want to link to the video when it's done. That's the kind of boilerplate, bog standard. I sent you a sword, tell me when you have the review ready, thank you. That I would say is the vast majority of the time. Some are more interested and want to hear nuanced thoughts about stuff, or have more suggestions about things that maybe I wouldn't normally put in a video because it's boring. I'm happy to provide that stuff too. Early communication, though, typically comes when something goes catastrophically wrong. Catastrophically wrong being defined as in, I would say, do not buy this under any circumstances, or it has a particularly bad showing or broke in a way that I would say is premature. I'll reach out to the vendor and say, here's what happened. what would you like to do? And like I said, sometimes they'll send another sword and it'll show better, and sometimes it will show the same thing or worse. And I have had both examples on the channel. So I feel like that is what a customer would have in terms of communication. They would say, I'm not satisfied, please correct it. They would send another sword, presumably. And that is what I give the vendor a chance to do in those situations, and then both go in the video. It also gives the vendor a chance, though, even if they say like, no, I'm not going to do anything, don't care that it broke, you're an idiot, then at least they know that this problem exists. And when I publish a video and other people may reach out with concerns around that product, they'll be ready with some sort of statement. And maybe that statement is that 5-headed SOB on the internet is a moron and you shouldn't listen to anything he has to say. Look at what he did. Obviously, it's stupid. At least they'll be ready, and those customers have that answer right away, and it's hopefully in everyone's best interest. I will also, in terms of communication, extend the offer, and so do know if I don't extend the offer, it is open. Happy to have vendors on a live stream where they can address any concerns that they have in my video publicly. So they can certainly give their side of the story if I have misrepresented something and they feel like that is the case. I've done that a handful of times. I'll continue to do it. It's an open offer to any vendor that sends me a sample. Happy to have you on the internet. Happy to have you say, here's what I thought you did right or wrong. Either way, I enjoy those conversations. So that's a little bit about communication. Hopefully that lets you peer behind the curtain a little bit in terms of YouTube videos. Those are generally the guidelines that I have, though, and that sums about just about everything up in terms of the general process or roadmap that I would use to get a review sample, and some of the flow of money or lack thereof, and some of the communication. So hopefully that gives you a better idea behind the curtain of how that works. Fundamentally, though, like I said, time, quantity, what sent, all of that is I would say generally negotiable. I'm a pretty small channel, and I'm just happy to be here in a lot of cases. I'm not so flexible, though, on if there's money or like, hey, I don't want you to post the review, or editorial control stuff. Those are the non-negotiable ones. Anyway, hopefully that gives you some idea. I'm going to move now into what targets do I cut and what benefits do they have. And this is going to be somewhat brief because I don't know that I'm going to change any hearts and minds, but I can give my perspective on some of the things you may see me cut on this channel, and what benefit I think they have, or how they might be analogous to things that could be encountered in a situation where a sword would be an appropriate tool. So if I'm not cutting anything and just moving it around, hopefully you have some idea of balance and movement. If it starts and stops, if it appears cumbersome or clubbish in my hand, or if it seems to move and flow in my hand well. That can be useful, and you're not necessarily going to have a great idea of what I'm doing if you're not an experienced practitioner in some way. If you're not an effective swordsman, then seeing me move is not particularly helpful. But if you are, especially if you've trained folks or you've been in the arts a long time, then seeing another person move can give you some indication of how that sword behaves, even if that person is not you and you've never met them. So there's that. Now, the next targets I cut would be on the lower, or like not super hard side of things. Thin sheets of paper, pool noodles, water bottles, all of those are primarily a mixture of, is your technique quasi-accurate and is your sword very, very sharp? Though I would argue that water bottles can be a little bit of a durability test, specifically around cutting the neck. It's pretty thick, hard plastic in the neck area of a bottle, especially in some like Gatorade bottles or thicker bottles, and I have had swords chip and break, so if you cut right through the neck of a bottle and your edge is just fine and shows no damage, that is a suggestion that it's a pretty durable sword. So those can be, but fundamentally those are mostly sharpness based, as are tatami and rolled newspapers. I would say that sharpness is a major factor in successful cuts of those things, but also skill can be. The sword can make up a lot, and if you do a bad cut and you successfully cut through a tatami mat or rolled newspaper, stack of rolled wetted newspapers, then the sword will bend and flex quite a bit in doing that. And if it springs back to shape, it's a sign that, again, the sword heat treatment or whatever is done to make that sword was done reasonably well, because bad cuts put a lot of stress on the sword. There's a lot of flex happening if you look at them in slow motion. So there's an element of durability that is factored into those types of targets as well. And you don't see that so much on water bottles unless the sword is very, very floppy. Now, the next stuff that I cut is debatably abusive, and I think debatably is vendors or manufacturers probably think of it as abuse and things that the sword really isn't intended to hit, but on a battlefield scenario you may well encounter an object like it. So branches are a good one. If you cut the shaft of a polearm or something hits your sword that you didn't mean to, or you whack into armor, then like a branch isn't a dissimilar thing. But should the sword break? No. Maybe it's going to bend, maybe it's going to twist, maybe it's going to dull, maybe rattle will develop, but it shouldn't break in half. And so I would say that these are things that you would hope your sword would survive, but not necessarily things that you should expect it to survive unscathed. Likewise, throwing at a tree, very abusive, puts a lot of shock in the sword, but maybe not akin to like you losing your sword off a horse or dropping it in the heat of battle or having it yeeted out of your hand. You'd hope that you could go pick it up, reclaim it, and that it would still be a sword. So doing that and throwing it at a tree several times is absolutely abusive, but if it can survive it, then suggests that everything is well made, I guess. Likewise, cutting into like logs, very abusive. It's a test of the edge. It's a test to see what's going to develop rattle. If you hit somebody in armor, something like that, then it could be not necessarily entirely dissimilar to that, but likely a little bit more abusive. Now, I've also cut metal barrels, and I've also cut armor, and I've done some of those things. Those are simulating armor in some way, though oftentimes when I cut them, they're braced in such a way where they're less human and probably have less give and are therefore harder than what you might have encountered on the battlefield if you struck armor. Likewise, laptops, shaving cream cans, things like that. You may encounter things you didn't expect to hit, and a laptop is not necessarily like anything on the battlefield, but it could be like armor or some metal object that you didn't expect to hit. And so if your sword, after striking those things, is still a sword, still has most of its edge, could still be repaired with relative ease, then that, to me, is a sign of a very durable product and maybe one that is desirable to people. There are folks that aren't just practitioners and are buying things for like the zombie apocalypse, right? Or the end of days where they have limited access to tools and they need something super, super resilient in terms of cutting things they don't want, where you're out of breath and swinging feverishly and hitting fence poles and brick walls, and you need the sword to still say a sword and still, be able to be repaired with simple sharpening stones and time while you're hiding from zombies. So those types of tests really make the products that help those folks, it helps that shine quite well. But historically, swords would probably break quite a bit quicker. The last thing that you'll often see me cut is either swords, doing edge-on-edge contact, which is a recipe to break a sword, or the croquet stick of doom, which is a sword-breaking device generously sent to me from sword friend Matt. The croquet stick of doom really focuses, as does edge-on-edge sword contact, a lot of stress into one small area, and the croquet stick of doom is a solid metal rod. Conceivably, if somebody was swinging a glaive at you and you hit the socket area that was made of metal, maybe it would not be dissimilar to that. However, that's a very kind of specific and still maybe not the same kind of thing. The croquet stick of doom is really just a thing that is probably harder than what a sword would encounter on the battlefield, and it's made to break swords. And making it to the croquet stick of doom in the reviews and destructive tests that I do is a sign of durability. In just, if it made it there, it's a reasonably durable sword, and how many strikes it takes to break the sword is a further testament to said durability of the sword. But inevitably, they all seem to fall to the croquet stick of doom. So anyway, that's a little bit about the targets. In my mind, abusing things as well kind of artificially ages them. I want to mention that I have in practice just seen people that have only done iaido with swords. That's drawing and sheathing the sword, starting it, drawing it, and stopping that cut fast. And I've seen swords break at the hilt from doing nothing but cut air. And so to me, like striking metal barrels, striking things that expose, potential flaws or weak points, and really stressing the metal in those areas that kind of is like artificially aging. And that's a mental leap that I'm making, where perhaps if it breaks for me striking armor or a metal barrel, it may have broken on you in 20 years of cutting nothing but air. I don't know that to be the case, but it suggests to me that this is like a somewhat artificial aging process, though that is a bit of a leap on my part, and I could be completely wrong on it. But I think if you don't intend on ever using your sword this way, it's still a testament to how well built it is, and hopefully that gives you some confidence in the product, at least if I'm doing a destructive test on it. Now, I'm going to move into the questions that I commonly get, and I get a lot of common questions, but these are the ones that I feel like focus on some of what we've talked about here, or what I've already talked about in the reviews, and further elaborate on some of the ideas. So the first one is, do you think getting free swords makes you biased? And I'd love to say no, but I'm human, I'm flawed, I'm imperfect, and so yes, inevitably getting a free sword does, but bear in mind that you're in theory bias either way. So if you spend your money on a sword, you've worked, and the money for a sword can sometimes be weeks or months or years of time of your labor to invest in buying that sword. And if you do that, then are you more likely to say it's good, or are you likely to say it's bad and didn't meet your expectations? Like, there are some biases that inherently happen when you are financially invested in the product yourself. They may not be the same as getting it for free, but getting it for free, what are you more likely to do? There's the possibility you don't want to jeopardize your relationship for free stuff, and so you say nice things. Or you're just grateful that you are invited to the party of free stuff, and so you say nice things. Or maybe you put no value in it because you got it for free, and people that get things that have no cost sometimes aren't perceived with value. And so maybe you're less likely to say nice things because you didn't spend any money on it and you're not personally invested in it. And some of the benefits you wouldn't seek them. You don't care. So maybe you're not going to say nice things. But either way, I would point out that there's bias. And I'd love to sit here and say that I'm not, but inevitably I am. I try to be conscious and transparent about where I'm biased, but there's obviously unconscious bias as well, and that's just part of the game. So hopefully, if you watch the video on mute and you hear nothing I have to say, it still lets you decide if it's worth your money or not. That's at least how I try to engineer the videos. The other part of this question, I think, is I don't want to sound complainy here, but free is not necessarily the right words. Now, I have gotten free swords before. Sword friends and vendors have sent me swords that said, here, thank you. Thank you for your contribution. I appreciate what you've done. Here is a free sword. You don't have to make a video about it. You don't have to do anything. Just enjoy. And so those are absolutely free swords. And yes, it's amazing when you get a free sword. It is so awesome when somebody does that. It gives me the positive feels even thinking about it. But it has happened a handful of times, and every time it does, it's magic. So yes would be the answer. It's amazing, and it does just make you want to glean positive things about that sword because it's free, and so it fills me with this sentimental, awesome feeling about that sword. But the vast majority of swords that are sent to me are not free in the strictest sense. The idea is that I will produce a video or feedback about that sword. It's not given to me with no expectation. There is an expectation assigned to it, and I have to fulfill that obligation, at least if I want to be a good person, right? So I have to make a video, and that video takes time, and so it's not free unless my time is worthless. And I can tell you that from a professional standpoint, it is not. My time is pretty valuable. So there's an investment in equipment that I've already mentioned. There's an investment in time. There's an investment in my own personal research and the value that maybe I bring. And so that is something. That's something I'm adding, and the vendor gets that in return. They get advertisement about their product. They get feedback from me in as much as it's valuable. And so it's not free. And also there's a fair amount of time commitment that I don't really want to understate. Like this takes quite a while. Despite the illusion that might come through editing, this video has taken me several attempts to make as coherent as it is. So there's a lot of time, even in explaining simple things like what I do. And so it's not free. I'm not complaining. It's still an awesome spot to be in, but free wouldn't be the right word. The next question is, do you worry about samples being cherry-picked? Do you worry that you're getting an example that is not the same as what a person would get? And the short answer is yes, it's absolutely a concern, but it's not something that I can really control. However, I feel asking for 3 samples at kind of the low-end side is not completely going to solve that problem, but at least it's harder to make 3 perfect ones and pick out 3 perfect examples across the spectrum of swords that are sent. So it helps me get an eye for consistency issues and things like that. So yes is the answer, but I can't do much about it other than get samples. And I can also state that it's not in the vendor's best interest to do that. So if you are a vendor, please don't do that. It's not going to help you. And why would be the answer. Like, well, it's a really short-term thing to say, I want to send Matt one that's perfect and then get a bunch of orders and disappoint all of them. Well, the comment section is going to be riddled with people that are angry about the order, or feedback is going to come, and you will anyone that is watching my video will then see the comments underneath it that say, this is a bad product, mine was not the same. PayPal cases will be opened up if you pay that way. Credit card cases will be opened if you paid that way, and the vendor won't be happy. You'll have a whole bunch of upset customers trying to get their money back, and that's not a good spot to be in. So if you send me something that isn't representative of what you sell, then that's the expected outcome, and that doesn't seem like a good spot to be in. So just from a logical standpoint, it doesn't really help the vendor to send me a perfect one, because if they can't deliver on that, then inevitably they're going to have a bunch of angry people wanting their money back, and that is also very, very uncomfortable. and like financially problematic. Like if they have to send another sword to make you happy, or if they have to give you a partial refund, that really eats into business and profits and their ability to operate in a way that doesn't, I think, make sense. So it's possible people are out there trying to get you. I hope that's not the case, but generally speaking, if they're a vendor that's been around for a minute, I can't see the logic in wanting to do that. Well, I mean, I can see why they would want to do it, but it'd be very short-sighted, is the point there. Next question is, what kind of money do you make from YouTube? I've talked about this a little bit, but generally over the lifespan of the product, I get about enough to make or buy a tatami mat, at least at, the higher end price of tatami mats as they were. But not a lot of money. YouTube memberships, right now I have around 50 or 60 members, so that's money that comes in. It's not nothing. There are super thanks or super chats or that kind of stuff that will happen as well from YouTube. So that's where the revenue comes from, and that's where the money is. Now, I would potentially take a sponsor in the future for something that is a product I liked, but I don't need it, is the point. So if it takes this thing that I feel like I get a lot of joy from and blows it up, like that would suck. That would be a lot of effort over a decade to see completely dissolved by taking sponsorships and for dumb things. Now, if it's a thing I liked, I would not mind doing it, but that would have to be the case. And at the moment, that's not the case. So it's not something I'd be inherently opposed to, but that's also where I get the money and what I generally make from YouTube. So if you see me post a video, you can expect Matt's got one tatami mat. Why do you only review katana? Well, I would say if you search the channel, I don't. I review a lot of different swords, but there is a focus on katana, and that's primarily because they are very prolific. There's a lot of them out there, a lot of different manufacturers. I study Japanese style swordsmanship, so maybe I have a little bit more to add in terms of critiques and feedback there. And I don't know. That's what I tend to be interested personally in terms of what I buy, and also there's a lot of vendors out there that sell them that seem willing to send me stuff. So that is why you see a focus on them, but I try to sprinkle in a whole bunch of other stuff and do a katana video every other video. But that still means there's a lot of katana, and that's because they're awesome and I like them. Does that mean they're the best sword ever? No, but I do happen to really enjoy them, and I share that joy with you, and hopefully it's useful. I also think that just because I focus on katana doesn't mean that A, I don't like anything else, or B, that any feedback I had to give would be useless. I've still had hundreds, I don't know about thousands, but at least hundreds of different European swords. I have a pretty substantial collection. I move them around and play with them quite a bit, and I review them, and I spend time and try to give them the same kind of treatment that I do any sword I would review on this channel. And hopefully that is useful. Now, I may not be a practitioner, but I still think I have a few useful bits to add, if nothing else, some pretty pictures. Sword breaking. Why do you do it? Why did you stop doing it? Well, I talked a little bit about the reasons for breaking a sword and where I think it proves some value. I often will harp on one example where a sword broke after I brought it to abusive stuff, and then the second example I had to bring to the same level of abuse, and that's where it broke. And it broke in a spot that I don't think it should have broken, and failed in a way that I don't think was acceptable to fail, and that showed me that, hey, that's why, exposing that kind of issue, which could absolutely happen. If you missed and hit your tatami stand, you could have had a similar kind of strike that could have broken the sword, and it could have turned into a helicopter of death. So exposing that issue so that it could be rectified by the manufacturer has made all the destructive tests worth it. But it's fun. It provides some value and entertainment, and everybody starts somewhere. Somebody might think that swords are indestructible, and seeing me push one and have it gradually degrade and eventually fail is hopefully educational, so they don't go and do that themselves, because it can be rather dangerous to do. Anyway, hopefully you see some value in it. If you don't, I'm not going to change your mind on it so much, but hopefully, if nothing else, it's some value of entertainment. And why did I stop doing it? Well, I didn't stop exactly, but I have stopped doing it all the time. I used to break swords on every sample I got. I would push to failure, and that was because it made me feel really weird to have anything of significant value after I got a review. So if the vendor didn't want it back, I broke it, and I've moved away from that for a couple reasons. One, three reasons actually. One, it's debatably useful after a while. So from a vendor standpoint, like if Ronin sent me another Dojo Pro, I don't think I'd break it. I've broken like 10 of those things on this channel. I can only do it so much before it's just the consensus that it's a very durable sword. So we could talk about other aspects of it, but beating it into a metal pole isn't going to further the conversation anymore. So there's little value, I think, in doing that. However, if there is a new sword company that's out and they are making swords that are sold as durable and well, that's a prime candidate to be tested and pushed to failure, because I think it does add to the conversation. But there are also limitations in terms of what I know. I'm pretty confident where swords are going to break. I've done it enough where like I don't feel like I'm personally learning much when I break a sword anymore. I feel like I kind of got it down and I'm pretty comfortable in where they're going to break. But sometimes there are surprises and things to learn. But those are the two things. Like, it doesn't add to the conversation and it doesn't help me much. And the last bit is it's very time consuming to do it. And I just don't have time to break every sword anymore. And so I've had to get over the idea that having something of value at the end is just something I've had to get comfortable with, even though I can't say that I am. So I do that, and it is, I guess, handy because I can do comparisons, and I can use those in other videos, and I can answer more questions than I would be able to otherwise, which is absolutely a useful thing. So I'm not breaking all of them, but I will still absolutely break some of them, especially when it would further the conversation or provide useful information to a number of people. So anyway, that hopefully answers that question. But I do intend to keep doing it, just not going to do it every single time. The last thing I'll talk about is maybe the most topical part, because I'm awesome at saving it for an hour into the video. Are reviews ethical? Do you owe anything to the reviewer? Are you obligated to say nice things? Are they blackmail? Like, that's kind of the conversation happening broadly around all the reviews right now because of just some topical stuff happening on the internet. And to me personally, a review is your honest opinion. You have to do that. Otherwise, it's not a review. It's just an advertisement, or it's a bashing session. If you're trying to be mean despite whatever the experience is, then you're out to get them for some reason. And like, if it's not your honest opinion, then basically it's not a review. Whatever it happens to be, it's not a review. So I feel like that is what is owed. If somebody sends a review sample, or I review my own products, if I call it a review, then that is what is owed, is my honest opinion. And hopefully it's substantiated by the words and photos and things that I show you to substantiate that opinion that I have. But I've seen some weird ethical issues go all over the board here. So I do want to say, like, I've had some vendors say, hey, will you review something? And then once I get it, it's like, hey, say nice things. Like, what? That's not nice enough. Like, maybe ham it up a little bit. No, like, that's not how it works. I have to say what I think. If I'm objectively wrong about something, I can make corrections, but I have to say what I think. Otherwise, I'm not doing a review. I've had likewise vendors tell me when I solicit review samples that they won't do it ever again, or that they've had a really bad experience with basically reviewers extorting them and reaching out to them saying, hey, I run this media channel and, or this media thing that I do, and if you don't send me stuff, then I'm going to say bad things about you, or I won't be able to say anything good about you, or some inference or underlying threat. And it certainly puts, I think, a bad taste in people's mouths. And vendors have to deal with that all the time as well. People asking for free stuff, people that are demanding, samples and stuff like that. And I imagine it gets exhausting dealing with that as well, because if some person with a large following reaches out to you and says, you better do this, or that's a risky and uncomfortable spot to be in with your business. And if you go out with it and say, hey, this person said this to me, the amount of people that, you only really stand to lose as a business owner. So it's a profoundly uncomfortable spot to be in. Anyway, the point is, I've kind of seen companies try to influence me and say, like, hey, you should say this, that, or the other. And I've also seen companies that have expressed, a dissatisfaction with being extorted. So I would say that ethics are a weird spot, and hopefully the reviews are just an honest take on whatever you're sent. And that's, I think, the best you can do. That's what I expect from any reviewer. I don't necessarily care how they handle money, but I'm hoping that whatever they're saying is their honest thought if they're calling it a review. And so I think that's about the only standard that I would put on it. Anyway, those are my thoughts around the subject. Hopefully all of this gave you some idea about me as a reviewer, how seriously to take me. I know it's been a long one. If you've stuck around here, please throw a comment in if you have any feedback on how I could do better. And likewise, if you see me doing something that is not on the goal, again, strong invitation to call me out on it. I would genuinely like to be helpful here, and if I'm not, then I would appreciate your help in course correcting. That's all I've got, though. Cheers, and thanks for watching.